Sir, stop. Who you are. I need identification.
What's the reason?
Don't worry about the reason. Give me your ID.
I can be verified. I'm federal law enforcement traveling on official paperwork.
Don't look like federal.
I'm telling you, verify me.
You don't get to tell me what to do.
Hands behind your back.
Two airport police officers at Chicago O'Hare thought they could stop a black man in the terminal, ignore his federal paperwork, and turn a simple verification into a public takedown with zero consequences. What they didn't know was that the calm man they decided to flex on wasn't a random traveler they could push around. He was an FBI special agent returning from a federal mission, traveling on official documentation for a scheduled follow-up briefing. And the moment they put hands on him, they created a problem that would not stay inside that terminal. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, before we rewind, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you watch stories where people stay calm, facts win, and accountability actually happens, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This started at around 9 a.m. inside Chicago O'Hare International Airport when the terminal was already moving fast. Morning flights, families dragging luggage, business travelers walking with purpose, gate agents calling names, and that normal airport noise that makes people tune everything out unless something looks serious. Caleb Rivers stood out for one reason only. He didn't look stressed. He moved like someone on a tight schedule, but fully in control. He had official travel documents and federal credentials because he was coming off a federal mission and heading toward a scheduled follow-up briefing. He wasn't wandering, not looking around suspiciously, not causing any disruption. He was doing exactly what airports are built for, getting from point A to point B. That's when airport police officers Derek Vaughn and Evan Klein stepped into his path. They didn't approach like they needed help identifying someone. They approached like they'd already decided the outcome. Their posture and pace signaled it. Vaughn led, Klein backed him up, and stayed close enough to make it clear this wasn't going to be a normal, quick check. Rivers stayed composed and immediately tried to handle it the clean way. He attempted to show his federal credentials and the official travel documents connected to his briefing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to walk past them. He did the thing professionals do when they know procedure matters. He offered verification. Vaughn did not treat it like verification. Instead of taking a breath and looking at what Rivers presented, Vaughn dismissed it. He treated Rivers' calm questions as if they were disrespect. He framed Rivers' tone as a problem, not the situation. This is one of the oldest power moves in these encounters. If the person stays calm and asks for clarification, you label it attitude so you can justify escalation. Rivers tried to keep it on track. He attempted to explain he was returning from a federal mission and traveling on official paperwork. He attempted to redirect them to the simple solution: verify the credentials, confirm the documentation, and let him continue to his scheduled briefing. Vaughn did the opposite. He turned the interaction into a contest. The more Rivers tried to keep it procedural, the more Vaughn treated that as defiance. Vaughn talked over him. Vaughn positioned himself closer. Klein mirrored the stance, giving Vaughn the confidence of a second body, a second uniform, and the implied threat of force. And while all of that happened, the cameras were already in play. Both officers had body cameras. Rivers knew it. He also knew what body cameras do when people remember they're on. They either keep officers honest, or they document how far someone is willing to go when they think they can control the narrative anyway. Around them, travelers started to notice the change in tone. Airports are full of small moments people ignore. This didn't look small. People slowed down, some glanced and kept moving. Others stopped because they saw a man trying to show paperwork, while two officers acted like paperwork didn't matter. A business traveler near the edge of the scene raised a phone. Another person stepped sideways to get a clear view. That's also how modern accountability works. When someone sees an encounter turning wrong, they start recording, not to be dramatic, but because they've learned how quickly the story changes when only one side writes the report. Rivers stayed composed anyway. He didn't perform. He didn't argue just to argue. He tried to keep the situation anchored in facts: credentials, documents, scheduled briefing, official travel. He tried to make it easy for them to do the right thing. Vaughn treated that calm as a challenge. Instead of calling in a supervisor or running a quick verification, Vaughn escalated to detention. That decision mattered. Verification is procedural. Detention is control. Detention is what you do when you want the person to feel the power, not when you want the truth. Klein didn't slow it down. He supported it. He didn't insist on looking at the documents himself. He didn't step back and say they needed to verify first. He stayed in formation with Vaughn, reinforcing the message that Rivers wasn't going anywhere. In a busy terminal, that shift is instant. People hear the tone change. They see the body language tighten. They see hands move closer to belts. They see the circle forming. And when the subject stays calm, it makes the escalation look even worse. Rivers attempted one more time to present his federal credentials. He attempted to get Vaughn to take them seriously. He attempted to keep it from becoming physical. He attempted to keep it from becoming a scene. But Vaughn had already moved past verification. Vaughn treated Rivers' questions as a reason to punish him. The officers closed distance. They positioned themselves like they were preparing for compliance, not conversation. And this is the part most people don't understand until they see the footage later. Once an officer decides calm is attitude, the situation becomes rigged. Anything you say can be labeled non-compliance. Anything you do can be called resisting. Even standing still can be framed as refusal. Rivers stayed steady. He didn't swing. He didn't shove. He didn't threaten. He didn't do anything that would justify force to the people watching. Vaughn and Klein moved anyway. Travelers were now fully watching. At least one person was recording with a clear angle. The officers' body cameras were capturing the audio, the pacing, and the exact sequence of choices. And Rivers, in that moment, understood something that Vaughn clearly didn't. This wasn't going to end with a simple airport report. Because the second they put him in a detention posture without verifying the federal credentials in front of them, they weren't just making a bad stop. They were creating evidence. And the next move they made was the one that turned a tense interaction into a public incident that would pull supervisors, command staff, internal affairs, and federal eyes into the terminal. The moment Vaughn decided this was a detention, he moved like the paperwork didn't exist. Rivers stayed where he was and kept his hands visible. He didn't try to run, didn't lunge, didn't step into either officer. He kept repeating the same basic point through calm, procedural language. He could be verified right there, and the documents were in front of them. Vaughn treated that calm like a challenge. He told Rivers to turn, and he framed Rivers' attempt to explain his arguing. Klein closed in at the same time, taking the position that turns a stop into a two-person control hold. This is where a lot of these encounters go sideways, and it's not complicated. If the officers had wanted verification, one of them would have stepped back, looked at the credentials, and radioed it in. Instead, they moved to physical control first, like the goal was compliance and embarrassment, not truth. They forced Rivers' hands behind his back. Rivers did not swing or fight. He tensed like any person would when strangers grab their arms in public, but he did not strike anyone, and he did not attempt to flee. That didn't matter. Vaughn and Klein used the moment to justify taking him down onto the terminal floor, right in the middle of the foot traffic. People nearby reacted immediately. Some backed away fast. Others froze. A few started speaking up, but most did what modern travelers do when they see something that looks wrong. They recorded. Lila Chen, a business traveler who had already been watching, kept her phone steady and aimed low enough to catch the hands, the takedown, and the cuffs. She didn't narrate for attention. She recorded because she understood what happens when there's no footage. Other phones came up too. different angles, different distances. In an airport, that means something important. You don't just get one version of events. You get a timeline from multiple viewpoints, and through all of it, the officers' body cameras captured the same thing the public did. Rivers offering credentials, Vaughn refusing to treat them as real, and the decision to escalate before verifying anything. Vaughn and Klein placed Rivers in handcuffs while he was on the floor. They held him there long enough for it to become a scene, not just a stop. Travelers walking past started slowing down, not because they were curious, but because something about it didn't match what they were seeing. Rivers still didn't panic. He kept his voice controlled and stayed focused on the same points. He was a federal agent. He had official travel documents, and this could be resolved with verification. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't begging. He was staying professional even while he was restrained in public. That contrast is what made Vaughn look worse in real time. When someone is calm and the officers are escalating, the crowd reads it fast, and Vaughn didn't help himself. Instead of switching into verification mode once the cuffs were on, he doubled down on control. He acted like the documents were irrelevant and pushed the idea that Rivers' calm pushback was disrespectful. In that moment, the bias didn't need a slur to be visible. It was in the way he refused to accept the simplest proof right in front of him. The commotion pulled a supervising sergeant toward them. Monica Hale arrived with the posture of someone who didn't want a story, just answers. She didn't stroll in slowly. She came in with urgency, because the scene already had phones pointed at it, and because she could tell from the crowd's reaction that something had gone off the rails. Hale's first move was the move Vaughn should have made from the start. She demanded to see Rivers' credentials and his travel documentation. Rivers provided them immediately. Hale reviewed what he had and verified what it said. She didn't treat the paperwork like a prop. She treated it like what it was: official documentation tied to federal work and a scheduled follow-up briefing. Within seconds, Hale confirmed Rivers was legitimate. And once she confirmed it, she didn't play the quiet cover-up game. She challenged the justification for the stop and the level of force used. She focused on the obvious question: why did this become a takedown when verification was available from the beginning? Hale's next move showed she understood the stakes. She called the duty chief, Captain Lawrence Mercer, and requested an immediate response to the scene. That call changed everything, because when command staff arrives, the goal shifts. It stops being about winning the moment and starts being about protecting the department from a documented mistake. And this one wasn't just a documented mistake. It involved a verified FBI special agent in a major international airport, with multiple videos already being created by the public. Captain Mercer arrived and assessed the situation fast. He didn't need a long briefing. He didn't need officers to spin it. He saw the cuffs. He saw the crowd. He saw the phones. He saw Hale holding paperwork that should have ended the stop before it ever got physical. Mercer immediately removed Vaughn and Klein from direct contact. He ordered all camera footage preserved without alteration. He made it clear the body cam video, audio, and any relevant surveillance clips were to be locked down. He didn't leave room for misunderstanding, and he didn't give anyone time to get cute with technical issues. Then he opened an internal investigation on the spot. Mercer also notified federal contacts, because this wasn't just a complaint from a traveler. This was an incident involving a confirmed FBI agent on official travel, detained and handcuffed in public after presenting credentials. That's the moment the power chess game flipped. Vaughn and Klein had started this thinking they controlled the outcome because they controlled the stop. But they didn't control the recordings. They didn't control the supervisor who showed up and refused to rubber stamp the story. And they definitely didn't control a duty chief who understood what federal scrutiny looks like. Hale ensured Rivers was brought up from the floor and that the cuffs were removed once his identity and status were verified. The tone around Rivers changed immediately once Mercer took command. People didn't suddenly become kinder. they became careful. And Rivers didn't celebrate. He stayed composed. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't posture for the crowd. He did what a professional does when the truth is finally acknowledged. He let the process start, because now the evidence was secured. By the time the scene settled, everyone involved understood this wasn't going to be handled quietly. There was body cam footage capturing the escalation. There were civilian videos capturing the takedown. There were witnesses in the terminal. And there was a supervising sergeant and a duty chief who had already created a paper trail that would force accountability. Vaughn and Klein were done controlling the narrative the second Mercer ordered that footage preserved. Once Captain Mercer locked the scene down, the airport didn't treat it like a routine incident anymore. It moved straight into damage control mode, and not the sloppy kind. This was the kind where leadership knew the footage would speak louder than any report. Within hours, Vaughn and Klein were removed from active duty and placed on leave while the department started formal reviews. Internal Affairs took over the primary investigation on the department side. At the same time, because the detained person was a verified FBI special agent on official travel, federal contacts were notified, and the incident triggered immediate outside scrutiny. That mattered for one reason. It stopped anyone from trying to shrink the story into miscommunication. The evidence trail was already heavy. There was body cam footage capturing the approach, the refusal to properly review documents, the escalation language, and the timing of the decision to go hands-on. There were civilian videos capturing the public takedown and the cuffs on a crowded terminal floor. There were witnesses who didn't know Rivers personally and had nothing to gain from stepping forward, which is exactly why their statements carried weight. And the department had another problem: prior history. As Internal Affairs built the case file, they weren't just looking at this one moment. They pulled prior complaints, use of force reports, and any patterns tied to Vaughn and Klein. Even when older complaints hadn't resulted in discipline, they still showed how often an officer ended up at the center of the same kind of incident. That's how termination-level cases become hard to defend. It's not just what happened once. It's what keeps happening. In the days that followed, the incident spread the way these stories always spread now: fast, clipped, and wide. A short civilian video hit social media first. Then other angles surfaced. Then people started comparing timestamps to the department's initial public messaging. That's when pressure rises, because it becomes less about opinions and more about contradictions. Reporters began calling the airport police department for comment. Travelers posted their own accounts about the moment the scene started and how quickly it became physical. A few said they initially assumed the officers had a strong reason, but changed their view when they saw Rivers trying to present documentation while the officers stayed focused on controlling him instead of verifying him. Behind the scenes, the department's legal team pushed one priority above everything else: preserve every piece of footage, preserve every log, preserve every radio call, preserve every report version. Because any gap would look like tampering, and tampering would turn a serious case into a career-ending scandal for leadership too. Captain Mercer did not leave that to chance. He kept the chain of custody tight and treated the body cam handling like an evidence locker issue, not a PR issue. Sergeant Hale's actions mattered in the investigation more than people realize. She arrived, demanded credentials, confirmed legitimacy quickly, and challenged the escalation. That created an internal record that the stop could have been resolved through verification. It also removed the most common defense officers use after a bad encounter: the claim that nobody knew and everyone acted reasonably based on confusion. Because Hale proved it wasn't confusing, it was ignored. While Internal Affairs did its work, Rivers did his. He documented everything from his side immediately: timeline, purpose of travel, the follow-up briefing he was scheduled to attend, and the fact that he had official paperwork and credentials available at the moment of contact. He also identified witnesses who were willing to provide statements and made sure the civilian video record wasn't treated as online noise, but as evidence that matched the body cam footage. Then the civil rights track began. Because this wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about a stop that escalated into force and detention after a calm offer of verification with strong indicators that bias influenced the decision-making. Rivers moved forward with a federal civil rights claim, supported by the footage, witness statements, and the investigative record that followed. As the parallel reviews progressed, Vaughn and Klein didn't just face a slap on the wrist. They faced termination-level discipline. The department had to evaluate policy violations around escalation, use of force justification, conduct, and the refusal to properly verify identification when it was presented. That's where certifications come into play too, because when an officer is found to have used unjustified force or made a stop that crosses civil rights lines, it can trigger consequences beyond one department, including decertification risk, depending on the outcome and the state's standards. This wasn't the kind of case where they could quietly move someone to a different shift and call it retraining. The evidence made that option look like a cover-up. The department also faced institutional consequences because leadership had to answer a bigger question. How did two officers feel comfortable escalating that fast in a busy terminal with cameras everywhere? So the policy side changed. The department was pushed into tighter oversight on bias-related stops, use of force thresholds, and Bodycam accountability. Supervisors were given clearer intervention requirements, especially in high-visibility public encounters. Verification procedures were tightened so that when official documentation is offered, officers are expected to take specific steps before escalating. Bodycam preservation rules were reinforced with stricter penalties for any delay or mishandling. They also had to address the attitude problem without calling it that in public, because everybody watching already understood the pattern. Calm questions were treated like disrespect, and that label became the excuse to escalate. Rivers did not walk away from it like it was just another bad day. He stayed professional, but he didn't let the incident get minimized. He pursued accountability through documented facts, not emotions. That's what gave the case strength. His calm in the moment, his organization afterward, and the amount of independent evidence that matched his account. And the most important ripple effect wasn't even about Rivers. It was about every traveler who watched that video later and recognized the moment where this could have ended peacefully, but didn't, because two officers chose control over verification. It reminded people that documentation matters, recordings matter, and supervisors who step in with backbone matter. Because when oversight actually shows up, power stops being a weapon and becomes a responsibility again. So here's the question for you. If you were in that terminal and you saw a calm person offering credentials while officers escalated anyway, would you record? Would you speak up? Or would you keep walking and hope it wasn't you next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever experienced something similar, share what happened and what you learned from it. And if you want more stories where facts win, accountability follows, and people don't get to rewrite what happened, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Sir, stop right there. I need to see identification.
Okay, tell me what this is about, and I'll hand you my ID.
Just answer the questions. What's your name, and are you a U.S. citizen?
Yes, I'm a U.S. citizen. I can show you my ID.
Tell me what you're investigating so I can move safely. Where were you born?
United States.
The document answers that. All right, we're done talking. You're coming with...
The entrance lot outside Ridgeview Mobility and Rehab Clinic in Cedar Point, Oregon, looked like any other weekday medical stop until the federal badges showed up. Late morning, patients coming and going, a van unloading a walker, staff moving between the front desk and the curb cut. Samuel Hart, 50 years old and paraplegic, rolled himself into the access lane near the doors with a slim folder on his lap and an appointment on the calendar like he'd done dozens of times before. He never made it inside. Boots moved fast behind him. A small ICE team closed in with their vests visible and their posture set, like they'd already decided what kind of encounter this would be. The lead agent, Caleb Rourke, didn't treat it like a basic contact or a quick check. He steered it straight into a citizenship verification demand and pushed Samuel to comply only in the way he wanted, not in the way that would actually confirm anything. Samuel offered identification. Staff offered to confirm he was a scheduled patient. Medical documentation and citizenship paperwork were held out in plain view. Rourke refused to meaningfully look at any of it. And that was the moment the clinic staff realized this wasn't about verification. It was about control. At this point, I just want to say we really appreciate you spending your time with us today. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, state, city, or country. And if you watch stories about accountability, abuse of authority getting exposed, and people keeping their dignity under pressure, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, zoom out, because this wasn't some misunderstanding that got cleared up in 30 seconds. This was a medical clinic parking lot turning into a public incident, recorded by phones and clinic cameras, and it ended up pulling in ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility and DHS oversight. People later argued about motives, procedure, and bias, but the core problem was simple. Multiple forms of verification were offered, and the agent leading the contact showed almost no interest in checking them. Samuel Hart wasn't a random passerby. He was medically retired from federal work, the kind of person who knew how agencies operated and kept his paperwork straight because he'd spent years inside systems that demanded it. He came to Ridgeview for mobility and rehab care. Staff knew him. He wasn't new, he wasn't disruptive, and he wasn't there to argue with anyone. He was there to do therapy and go home. The clinic itself ran on routine. Appointments were scheduled tight. Staff moved on timelines. Patients needed predictable environments because many of them were dealing with pain, fatigue, and mobility limitations. That mattered because when the agents arrived, the staff didn't react like people trying to pick a fight. They reacted like professionals trying to prevent a scene from endangering patients. Rourke didn't respond like a professional trying to confirm facts and leave. The approach started with attention that didn't match the setting. Rourke and his team focused on Samuel immediately. They didn't ask the clinic to verify anything first. They didn't start with the simplest question that could be resolved in seconds. They moved straight into a status check, and the way they did it put Samuel in a corner, socially and physically, because a man in a wheelchair in an access lane can't just step away to cool things down. Samuel did what calm, prepared people do. He presented identification. He offered citizenship paperwork. He didn't wave it around or act dramatic. He held it where it could be seen and tried to give them the quickest path to verifying and ending the contact. Clinic staff stepped in beside him and reported the same thing. Samuel was a regular client with a scheduled appointment. They offered to pull his appointment record. They offered to verify his identity through their intake information. They offered medical documentation showing why he was there and why the interaction needed to stay safe and controlled. Rourke treated that help like it didn't count. He brushed off staff attempts to confirm Samuel's presence as irrelevant. He dismissed on-site security when the guard tried to mediate and keep the space safe. He kept steering the interaction back to his own terms, as if the only acceptable outcome was Samuel complying in a way that let Rourke look in charge, not in a way that actually verified the truth. Witnesses later described that as the moment the situation felt racially motivated, not because anyone read minds, but because of how fast it escalated and how little curiosity Rourke showed about the documents in front of him. People saw a man offering proof, saw staff offering confirmation, and saw an agent refusing to engage with any of it while escalating anyway. That's the power game in real life. The authority figure controls the definition of cooperation. If the person complies in a way that solves the issue but doesn't submit to the performance, the authority figure labels it refusal. Samuel stayed composed. He stayed on the same message. He was a citizen. He had documentation, and he was there for a scheduled medical appointment. He didn't give Rourke a reason to claim fear or danger. He didn't act unstable. He didn't create a threat. Rourke still shifted the tone from inquiry to control. He positioned his team closer. He used body placement to tighten space instead of creating room. He redirected attention away from the paperwork and toward compliance language. The clinic staff could see it in real time. This wasn't being handled like an interaction meant to end quickly. It was being handled like an interaction being built into something bigger. Then, the cameras appeared. First, one bystander's phone came up, then another. People had seen enough public incidents to recognize the pattern. Someone calm offering documents, an authority figure refusing to look, and a situation getting pushed toward force. The clinic's exterior cameras were already running, covering the entrance and access lanes for safety. The moment was now being captured from multiple angles. That should have ended it, or at least slowed it down. It did the opposite. Instead of taking the clean exit, look at the documents, confirm, leave, Rourke doubled down on control. He treated the continued offers of verification as argument. He treated staff involvement as interference. He acted like outside confirmation from a medical clinic, and an on-site guard didn't matter, even though those were exactly the kinds of neutral sources that usually help close an identity question fast. Samuel still didn't change. He kept the paperwork available. He kept his posture controlled. He kept his hands visible and his movements limited. He kept trying to solve the problem using the tools any normal person would use: documents, records, witnesses. And that's when staff saw the shift that turns a tense scene into a disaster. Rourke stopped acting like he was checking status and started acting like he was setting up custody. His attention moved from the paperwork to Samuel's body position in the wheelchair. His team moved in tighter. The words he used, based on witnesses, centered on Samuel not verifying properly, even though Samuel had repeatedly presented what he had. The bystanders kept recording. The clinic cameras kept rolling. The staff stayed close enough to witness, but far enough to avoid giving Rourke an excuse to claim he was being obstructed. Samuel was about to be arrested in a medical clinic parking lot, not because he lacked proof, but because the agent leading the contact refused to treat proof as proof. Rourke made the move that every witness remembered the same way later. He stopped treating Samuel like a person with paperwork and started treating him like a body that needed to be controlled. Samuel was still in the wheelchair, still holding documents that could have ended the entire situation in minutes. Staff were still nearby, still offering to verify through clinic records and to keep the interaction calm. On-site security was still present, watching for patient safety issues and trying to prevent a physical confrontation in an access lane. Rourke didn't slow down. He directed his team to take custody. In that moment, the logic shifted from verification to domination. Instead of accepting the information offered, Rourke framed Samuel's insistence on being verified properly as a refusal to comply. That framing mattered because it gave Rourke the excuse he needed to escalate while acting like Samuel forced his hand. Bystanders didn't miss it. Phones stayed up. People kept recording because the scene didn't match the justification. A man in a wheelchair was offering documents. Staff were offering confirmation. The agent was escalating anyway. Samuel stayed composed. He did what a careful person does when they know everything is being twisted. He kept his movements limited, kept his hands visible, and continued presenting the same proof he'd already offered. He didn't turn it into a shouting match. He didn't create a threat. Rourke moved in close to the wheelchair. Witnesses later described Rourke reaching toward Samuel in the chair in a way that looked rushed and careless for the setting. The chair wasn't just an object. It was Samuel's stability. It was his safety. It was the only reason he could move through the world independently. And Rourke treated it like a handle. Clinic staff reacted immediately because they understood the obvious risk. They reported later that they tried to get Rourke to stop and let them assist to avoid a fall and keep things safe. Security also stepped forward to keep space clear and prevent a pileup around a disabled patient. Rourke waved them off again. That refusal wasn't small. It meant Rourke chose force over procedure. and chose ego over safety in a place built for medical care. The arrest turned physical fast. As Rourke grabbed and repositioned the wheelchair, Samuel's balance shifted. Witnesses in video later supported the same outcome. Samuel ended up on the pavement. It happened in seconds, in full view of staff, patients, and cameras. It wasn't a controlled transfer. It wasn't a careful removal. It was a loss of stability caused by someone handling a wheelchair like it didn't have a human being attached to it. Samuel hit the ground and stayed there. People in the parking lot reacted the way people do when something crosses a line. Staff moved toward him, but carefully, because they didn't want to make it worse. Someone called for medical help immediately. The security guard worked to keep space around Samuel open so he could breathe, and so EMS could get in quickly. Rourke did what authority figures often do after a visible mistake. He tried to frame it before anyone else could. Witnesses later said Rourke pushed the narrative that it was an accident and that Samuel's behavior caused it. The problem was that the videos didn't support that version. The footage showed Samuel offering documents and staying controlled. It showed Rourke escalating, closing space, and handling the chair and Samuel in a way that created the fall. And because multiple people were recording, there wasn't just one angle. There were several. Clinic cameras also captured the wide view. Those cameras didn't care about anyone's story. They captured timing, positions, movement, and the order of events. They captured the difference between a careful procedure and a rushed control tactic. EMS arrived and treated Samuel on site before transporting him. Staff stayed involved because Samuel was their patient and because they understood documentation would matter later. They noted the timeline, the witnesses, and what was offered and refused. They also understood something else that became clear fast. The physical injury wasn't the only damage. Samuel had been publicly treated like a suspect in a place where he came for care, and it happened in front of people who knew he was there legitimately. Rourke and the team remained on scene long enough to keep control of the immediate area, but control was already slipping. Not because anyone was fighting them, but because recording had turned the parking lot into evidence. Within hours, clips started moving beyond the clinic, first through private messages, then through local community pages, then through wider social platforms. The story spread the same way these incidents always spread. Someone posts video, people ask what happened, and then more angles appear that either confirm the first clip or expose what was left out. This is where the power chess game flipped. In the moment, Rourke held badges, a team, and the authority to arrest. After the moment, the public had footage, timestamps, and witnesses who could describe what they saw without needing to guess. And the details were hard to defend. A scheduled clinic patient, known to staff, offering citizenship paperwork and ID, with agents refusing to meaningfully review it, escalating anyway, and then a disabled man ending up on the pavement during an arrest that did not need to happen. As the clip circulated, the questions became sharper. Why refuse the documents? Why dismiss staff verification? Why ignore on-site security, trying to keep patients safe? Why take physical control in a way that made a fall predictable? Those questions didn't come from rumors. They came from what people could see. The first official responses tried to keep it contained, leaning on generic language and the idea that the incident was being reviewed. But the public didn't treat it like a mystery because the video didn't leave much room. People could watch the escalation. They could watch the refusal to verify. They could watch the moment Samuel hit the ground. By the end of the first news cycle, this was no longer just a clinic incident. It was a federal optics problem, and it was headed toward oversight, whether anyone wanted it or not. Once the video spread past Cedar Point, the situation stopped being a local incident and became an evidence problem for the agency. ICE leadership couldn't treat it like a private complaint because it wasn't just one person's account. It was multiple recordings, clinic camera footage, timestamps, and staff statements that lined up. The public saw the same sequence. Samuel offered documentation, staff offered confirmation, the lead agent refused to engage with it, and the interaction escalated into a physical arrest that ended with a disabled man injured on the ground outside a medical clinic. Within days, ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility opened a formal review. DHS oversight offices also got involved because this wasn't just about one arrest. It raised bigger questions about how status checks were being initiated, how agents were handling disability-related interactions, and whether the refusal to review documents was deliberate. Rourke was placed on administrative leave while the review started. That move wasn't a punishment. It was containment. Agencies do it when they know footage exists, and they need time to collect statements, logs, camera access, and chain of custody records before anyone makes things worse. The clinic didn't let the evidence disappear. Ridgeview's leadership preserved their exterior camera footage immediately. Staff documented what they saw while it was still fresh. The security guard wrote a detailed incident report. Bystanders backed up their recordings and shared copies. EMS records established injuries and timing without relying on anyone's opinion. By the time investigators started asking questions, there wasn't just one story being told. There was a record. Rourke's initial framing of it as an accident didn't hold up under that record. Investigators didn't need speculation. They had footage showing how quickly the interaction escalated, how often verification was offered, and how often it was dismissed. They had witness statements describing the same pattern: a refusal to verify, a dismissal of staff input, and control tactics used in a setting where medical safety should have been the priority. Public attention made it move faster. Local media requested information. Advocacy groups highlighted the disability aspect and questioned the legality of turning a clinic visit into a status confrontation without a clear basis. Community members called it profiling because the behavior looked like a decision had been made before any documents were considered. Samuel's recovery was not simple. He already lived with a disability. The fall and the arrest created setbacks that affected his mobility care and his trust in public interactions. Staff supported him through the immediate crisis, but the bigger reality was this. He went to therapy that day and left in an ambulance, while his paperwork sat ignored. That's where the legal response started. Samuel retained counsel. His attorney, Marisol Vega, didn't build the case around emotion. She built it around procedure, evidence, and avoidable escalation. She focused on the refusal to verify documentation, the decision to ignore clinic and security verification, the shift from questioning to physical control, and the injury outcome that followed. The claims were federal, and they were serious. They addressed unlawful detention and arrest logic, excessive force issues tied to disability interaction, and failures in de-escalation and evidence handling. They also targeted the decision-making chain, not just the physical moment, because the clearest problem wasn't only that Samuel ended up on the pavement. The clearest problem was that the situation never needed to get anywhere near that point. As the internal process continued, Rourke's position weakened. Administrative leave turned into deeper review. The agency had to answer for why a lead agent refused to review documents being offered, why staff attempts to verify a scheduled patient were treated like interference, and why a wheelchair interaction was handled in a way that created a high risk of injury. Rourke was ultimately terminated. That termination didn't erase what happened, but it signaled that the agency couldn't defend his conduct once the evidence was fully examined. It also sent a message to every agent watching the fallout. Cameras, witnesses, and preserved records could remove the usual room for spin. The civil case didn't end with a symbolic apology. It ended with a multi-million-dollar settlement and documented changes that went beyond one employee. The settlement included policy and training updates focused on status check procedure, disability interactions, de-escalation standards, and evidence preservation requirements. The goal wasn't just to punish, It was to reduce the chances that another person in a vulnerable position would face the same kind of escalation while trying to access medical care. Ridgeview changed its own protocols too. Staff received updated guidance on how to respond when law enforcement or federal agents arrived on site. They tightened documentation procedures, clarified who had authority to coordinate with outside agencies, and reinforced immediate steps for preserving camera footage and incident reports. The clinic didn't want to be the setting for another preventable disaster. Samuel didn't walk away from this with a win feeling. He got accountability, compensation, and policy change. But he also carried the reality of what it cost him physically and emotionally. What he did gain was something important. He didn't have to wonder whether the world saw what happened. The evidence made it impossible to pretend it was nothing. And that's the point viewers should take from this. This wasn't a story about someone being loud. It was about someone being prepared, staying calm, and still being targeted by an authority figure who refused to verify the truth. The accountability didn't come from a miracle. It came from documentation, witnesses, preserved footage, and oversight that couldn't ignore what the public could already see. So now I'm asking you, if you were in that parking lot and you saw an agent refusing to look at documents while escalating anyway, what would you do? Would you record? Would you speak up? Would you push for the footage to be preserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that evidence matters. And if you want more real, grounded stories where accountability actually happens, like and subscribe.
Sir, you need to get up and leave right now.
I'm a paying customer. What's the reason you're ordering me out?
You're loitering. You've been watching the counter. Stand up.
That's not accurate. I ordered and paid.
Stand up.
Officer, you will regret everything.
Riverside Roasters sat right off a busy downtown Chicago corner, where the lunch rush started early and nobody had time for drama. It was 12:18 p.m. On a weekday, the cafe was packed and the line at the counter was still moving when Officer Evan Rourke walked in like he was responding to an emergency. He didn't scan for a fight, he scanned for a target. Within seconds, he locked onto one man seated alone near the sidewall, a tablet open, a briefcase by the chair. The man looked like he belonged in a courtroom or a corporate office. Clean suit, controlled posture, the kind of person most places welcomed without question. Rourke didn't welcome him. Rourke closed the distance fast, planted himself at the table, and ordered the man to leave immediately. He said the man was loitering, said he'd been watching the counter, and said he matched vague reports from the area. No details, no confirmation from staff, no attempt to verify whether he had even bought anything. The man, Derek Langford, didn't jump. He didn't argue like he was trying to win a shouting match. He kept his hands visible and explained he was a paying customer reviewing case paperwork and notes on his tablet. Rourke treated that calm explanation like a challenge. Every time Derek shifted, Rourke reacted as if a normal movement could become a threat. When Derek tried to move toward his briefcase to offer identification and clear up the mistake, Rourke snapped him back verbally and physically, with commands to keep his hands away from the bag. He didn't take the easy off-ramp. He tightened the situation in front of everyone. And in a crowded cafe with phones already coming out, tightening the situation didn't make it safer. It just made it harder to undo. At this moment, we want to tell you we're genuinely grateful you're spending your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel going. Drop where you're watching from, city, state, or country. And if you like stories where people stay composed, get things on record, and force accountability the smart way, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, rewind, because this didn't start with handcuffs. It started with a rookie officer looking for a win. Derek Langford had built a career around staying calm under pressure. He was a federal attorney in his 30s, well-dressed, organized, and methodical. That day, he wasn't out for attention. He was out for focus. Riverside Roasters was one of his regular spots when he needed to review documents outside the office without being pulled into meetings. He walked in, ordered, paid, and sat down like any other customer. He opened his tablet, pulled up case files, and started sorting notes into a clean sequence. He wasn't hovering near the register. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't watching employees. He was doing what half the room was doing, working. But Officer Evan Rourke came in with a different mindset. Rourke was new enough to still move like everything was a test. He'd been hearing constant pressure about being proactive, making contacts, showing activity. Earlier radio chatter in the area had mentioned a suspicious person report near businesses, the kind of vague description that could be stretched to fit anyone if an officer wanted it to. Rourke wanted it to fit someone. When he entered the cafe, he scanned past the obvious crowd and focused on the man alone with the briefcase. The briefcase became a prop in Rourke's head. The focused posture became suspicious. The occasional glance toward the door became watching. Rourke built a story in seconds, then walked up like it was already proven. At the table, Derek responded like someone who understood how quickly ordinary moments could turn into official accusations. He kept his hands visible. He spoke evenly. He gave clear facts. He was a customer, he was working, he could show identification. Rourke rejected the proof before it was even offered. He treated Derek's attempt to reach for his identification as a threat. He raised his voice so the room could hear him. He repeated warnings about the bag. He framed the situation as dangerous, not because Derek had done anything violent, but because Rourke needed the situation to justify what he was doing next. That's when customers started recording openly. A staff member behind the counter stared, frozen between stepping in and staying out of the way. A couple people near the window held their phones steady. Others shifted in their seats, watching Rourke's posture and Derek's hands. The room wasn't on Rourke's side the way he expected. It was watching him. Rourke escalated anyway. He issued an ultimatum. Derek needed to leave immediately or he would be arrested, not for a clear crime. For refusing to comply with an order based on a suspicion Rourke couldn't explain in specifics. Derek didn't argue in circles. He stayed composed and repeated the same facts. Paying customer, working, willing to identify himself. No threat. Rourke moved to handcuffs. He grabbed Derek's arms, pulled them behind his back, and put him in cuffs using broad, catch-all accusations that sounded official, but didn't require proof in the moment. Derek did not resist. He did not create a physical struggle. He did not give Rourke anything that could be spun into a justification later. He stayed controlled because he understood what mattered more than winning a debate inside a cafe. What mattered was the record. As Derek was pulled up from the chair with cuffs on, multiple phones stayed pointed at the scene. Staff looked stunned. Customers looked angry. Rourke looked locked in, committed to the decision he had already made, even though the room was documenting it in real time. And Derek was already thinking ahead to the next move, because he knew the real fight wouldn't be in the coffee shop. It would be at the precinct where officers try to make mistakes vanish quietly unless someone forces everything into writing. Rourke brought Derek into the precinct still in cuffs, still acting like he had just stopped something dangerous. He used the same vague language he used in the cafe and leaned on the usual catch-all claims that sound serious but don't explain a real crime. At the front desk, the desk sergeant on duty, Ray Ibarra, looked up and immediately recognized Derek. Ibarra didn't treat it like a normal intake. He didn't ask for small talk. He went straight to the problem. He asked who cuffed Derek and why he was being brought in. Rourke started giving his version fast, trying to frame it as a safety call and a suspicious person stop that turned into non-compliance. Ibarra cut him off and told him to remove the cuffs. Rourke hesitated because removing cuffs that quickly makes the arrest look wrong. Ibarra didn't debate. He repeated the order and made it clear it wasn't optional. Rourke unlocked the cuffs, and Derek rubbed his wrists once, then placed his hands back on the counter where everyone could see them. Ibarra spoke to Derek in a controlled, professional way and confirmed who he was. Derek identified himself as a federal attorney and explained step by step what happened inside the cafe. He paid, sat down, reviewed case notes, offered identification, and got cuffed anyway. He kept it factual. No yelling, no threats. That's when the station dynamic changed. Within minutes, a supervisor came out from the back, then another. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to reduce exposure. They spoke in the usual careful tone people use when they want someone to leave without making a record. They tried to frame it as a misunderstanding and told Derek he was free to go. Derek didn't take it. He told them he wasn't leaving with nothing documented. He said that if an officer decided there was probable cause to put him in handcuffs and transport him, then that officer needed to put the reason in writing under his own name. He also made it clear he wanted the incident number, the names of everyone involved, and a formal record of the detention. One of the supervisors tried to steer it back toward the quiet exit. Derek didn't argue the point emotionally. He explained the simple reality. Without paperwork, the department could later claim it never happened, or that it was a brief contact. He wasn't giving them that option. Ibarra understood what Derek was doing. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He was forcing accountability through process. The supervisors didn't like it, but they couldn't physically make Derek accept a quiet release. They also couldn't justify holding him with no charge while trying to avoid creating a record. So they did what departments do when they realize the person in front of them knows the system and won't be pushed out of the building. They started backpedaling in a controlled way. Ibarra directed staff to open an entry for the incident and collect the basic information needed to document what happened. Derek stayed at the desk and watched every step. He asked for the arresting officer's name and badge number to be recorded correctly. He asked for the time of detention to be recorded correctly. He asked for the reason for detention to be written clearly, not vaguely. That's where Rourke's problem got bigger, because now he had to choose between writing the truth, which would admit he ignored offered identification and had no clear basis, or writing an exaggerated story that could be tested against video. Rourke tried to stick to his original claims. He described Derek as suspicious, watching the counter, and reaching toward a bag in a way that made him fear for safety. He leaned on the kind of language rookies copy from training when they want their actions to look justified after the fact. Derek didn't interrupt with speeches. He did something more effective. He pointed out specific facts that would be easy to verify. He was a paying customer. Staff could confirm it, and multiple customers recorded the interaction from the moment the officer approached the table. He told them to preserve every body camera file and every dispatch log connected to the call. That made the supervisors tense because it meant they were now on notice. Once someone asks for preservation like that, deleting or losing footage becomes its own crisis. Rourke stood off to the side while this happened, watching the situation slip out of his control. In the cafe, he had the uniform and the volume. In the station, paperwork and recordings mattered more than volume. After the documentation started, the supervisors tried one more move. They tried to keep it minimal. No booking, no fingerprints, no formal charges. Just enough to say something occurred, then send Derek out the door. Derek pushed back again calmly and insisted that if the department was claiming a lawful arrest, they needed to complete the steps that make it an arrest on record. If they weren't willing to do that, then they needed to document that he was detained and transported without charge, and provide him with the case number and the officer's information so he could pursue it through the complaint process. That forced a decision. They weren't going to book a federal attorney on garbage allegations that were already likely on camera. And they also couldn't pretend nothing happened. So they chose the least damaging option they could still defend. Document the incident, release him without charges, and try to move on before the story spread. Derek didn't let them control the ending. Before he left, he made sure he had what he came for: the incident information tied to the event, the names attached to it, and confirmation that footage would be preserved. He also made it clear he would be filing a formal complaint and requesting the records. Then he walked out of the precinct the same way he walked into the cafe earlier that day: controlled, organized, and not interested in a scene. But the scene was already out there, Because while supervisors were trying to contain the damage inside the station, the videos from Riverside Roasters were already being sent around. And by the time Derek got back to his car, people who didn't know him at all were already watching what happened and asking the same question. Why did the officer refuse the easy proof and go straight to cuffs? By mid-afternoon, the cafe videos were already moving faster than the department could react. One clip showed the start. Rourke stepping in close, giving Derek an immediate leave order, and treating normal hand movement as a danger sign. Another clip caught the cuffing from a different angle and showed Derek staying still while people in the shop reacted. A third clip showed staff in the background looking confused because they knew Derek had paid and wasn't bothering anyone. Those recordings mattered because they showed timing. They showed Derek offering to clear it up. They showed the officer refusing that off-ramp. A customer posted the video to social media with a short caption about a man being handcuffed for sitting in a coffee shop. Within an hour, local accounts picked it up. Then local reporters started calling Riverside Roasters, asking if the staff would confirm Derek had purchased something. The staff didn't need to guess. The register system and the employees on shift could confirm it. That same day, a local station ran the footage and did what news does when video is clear. They looped it, slowed it down, and put an official department statement next to it. The department's first reaction wasn't accountability, it was containment. A spokesperson used careful language and said the incident was being reviewed. They avoided naming the officer. They avoided calling it an arrest. They used neutral terms like encounter, contact, and investigation. The point was to lower the temperature and prevent a headline that sounded like what it was: a paying customer taken out in cuffs on vague suspicion. But the problem was that Derek wasn't a random person who disappeared after release. He had already forced an incident number, forced the names onto a record, and demanded preservation of footage and logs. That meant the department couldn't honestly act like it was a misunderstanding with no paper trail. It also meant that if they later tried to change the story, the timestamps and recordings could be compared. By evening, national accounts had it. Not because the situation was unique, but because the video showed a very common pattern in a very clean way. A vague suspicion, a refusal to accept offered proof, and an escalation that looked more like ego than safety. The next morning, Derek went to work like normal, but he didn't treat the story like a social media moment. He treated it like a case. He sent formal requests for records connected to the event, dispatch calls in the area, any suspicious person reports used to justify the stop, the officer's body camera, and any nearby security footage from the cafe. He also filed a formal complaint through the city's oversight process. He didn't rely on one path. He used every path that created documents. At the same time, the department started its internal process in the way departments usually do when video is public: separate review, early memos, supervisors collecting statements, and an attempt to figure out what the officer claimed in writing before the narrative got away from them. Rourke wrote his version early. He leaned into safety language. He described Derek's movements in a way that made it sound like he had no choice. He put emphasis on the bag, the hands, and perceived threat cues. He used broad terms that are hard to disprove unless you have video. The department did have video, not just from the public. Now they also had the likelihood of their own camera footage and cafe security footage. That's where early reports become risky, because anything exaggerated can be checked frame by frame. By the end of that week, Derek's legal team had started building the federal case. Derek didn't need outside counsel to understand the basics, but he still brought in civil rights attorneys for focus and distance. The claims were clear and standard in these situations: unlawful detention, false arrest, and civil rights violations tied to a lack of reasonable cause and a refusal to accept available proof. The lawsuit also aimed higher than one officer, because the pattern behind the officer matters: training, supervision, and a culture that rewards stops without rewarding accuracy. The filing made it official, and the city's response shifted immediately. Once litigation is active, the goal becomes defense. Officials and union voices started framing the incident a safety call and a tough job situation. They used the usual talking points about split-second decisions, officer safety, and incomplete video context. But the public footage already showed context. It showed Derek seated. It showed Derek offering to clear it up. It showed the officer refusing. That didn't leave much room for a complicated explanation. Then another pressure point hit the department. The cafe staff and several customers were now identifiable witnesses, and reporters started interviewing them. Multiple people described the same sequence. Derek was quiet, he wasn't causing trouble, and the officer came in already set on removing him. This is where Derek's paper trail move paid off again, because while the department tried to treat it as a simple review, Derek's records requests and legal preservation demands meant the department had to account for body camera files, dispatch history, and written reports in a way that could later be examined under oath. This wasn't going to stay at the level of a press statement. Within 2 weeks, the story wasn't only about one rookie officer in one cafe. It became about why suspicious person calls were being handled with quick escalation, and why officers were rewarded for making contacts, not for making correct calls. Reporters started looking at complaint numbers, stop data, and how often vague reports were used to justify detention. And inside the department, supervisors weren't asking whether the incident looked bad anymore. They were asking what else it could expose. Because if Rourke's report didn't match video, that wasn't just a bad judgment call. That was a documentation problem. And once you have a documentation problem in a case with national attention, you get an internal affairs investigation that can't be smoothed over with a quiet release. By that point, Derek had already made his decision clear through his actions. He wasn't going away, and he wasn't letting the department control the narrative with vague language. The next stage was the one that decides careers, internal findings, what was said in early reporting, and whether the officer ignored proof and rewrote the story afterward. Internal affairs opened the case quickly, not because the department suddenly cared about Derek's experience, but because the video forced it. Once footage is public and the person detained has the knowledge and resources to push it, the department has to treat it as exposure risk. They pulled everything tied to Rourke's stop. They pulled dispatch logs to see what the actual vague reports were and whether they matched anything specific about Derek. They pulled Rourke's body camera. They pulled any available cafe footage. They also collected statements from the staff and witnesses who recorded from inside Riverside Roasters. Then they compared it all to what Rourke put in writing. That's where it collapsed. Rourke's report leaned on the usual defenses. He claimed Derek matched suspicious behavior, claimed he was watching the counter, claimed the briefcase movement made him fear for safety, and described Derek's behavior in a way that implied escalating risk. But the recordings and witness accounts showed the opposite pattern. Derek stayed seated, stayed calm, and offered identification early. The officer shut that down and escalated anyway. Internal affairs focused on 3 specific failures, because those are the ones that can't be explained away as judgment. 1, ignoring offered proof Derek offered to identify himself to resolve the stop. IA determined Rourke refused that option and treated normal movement towards identification as a threat, which made the escalation look chosen, not necessary. 2, exaggerating fear to justify force. Rourke described his fear as if it was based on clear danger cues. IA determined those cues were not supported by video, witness descriptions, or the timing of events. In other words, his fear was written to defend the outcome after the fact. 3, misrepresenting Derek's behavior in early reporting. This was the worst one. It wasn't just that Rourke made a bad stop. It was that his written description didn't match the available evidence. IA treated that as a credibility issue, because once an officer is caught reshaping facts in a report, the department can't trust his future reporting, and prosecutors can't rely on him as a witness. While IA did its work, the department tried to manage the outside story. They released limited statements about an ongoing review and avoided specifics. Union voices and sympathetic commentators tried the usual framing about safety and split-second decisions. But the department couldn't defend the paperwork against the recordings. Once IA finalized its findings, the department moved to termination. The official reason wasn't bad optics. It was conduct tied to escalation and reporting accuracy. Rourke's defenders could argue he was inexperienced. They couldn't argue the video was wrong, and they couldn't argue the report matched what happened. Rourke was fired. The lawsuit moved forward at the same time, and the city's legal team faced a problem that made settlement realistic. They had a public video, a paying customer, no charges, an IA finding that criticized the officer's actions and reporting, and a plaintiff who knew how to push discovery. If the case went deeper, it wasn't going to stay about one incident. It was going to pull training materials, supervision decisions, stop quotas, and stats-driven activity expectations into the open. That's why the city settled. The settlement landed at $2 million. It wasn't a feel-good number. It was a number designed to stop the case from reaching the stage where every internal practice gets dissected in public filings and depositions. Derek didn't treat the settlement like a victory lap. He made it public that he was redirecting the money into a legal defense fund aimed at helping people who get targeted the same way, but don't have a federal title, don't have connections, and don't have the time or knowledge to force records and preservation requests. He didn't frame himself as special. He framed the system as predictable and built a way to help others fight it. The department also made changes, not because it wanted to, but because the case forced them to show reform on paper. That included revised guidance on handling vague, suspicious person calls, additional training emphasis on accepting identification and de-escalating when proof is offered, and tighter review requirements when a stop results in cuffs without a charge. These changes weren't magic. They were damage control. But they were still changes that didn't exist before the video and the lawsuit. The story ended the way most of these stories don't. It ended with consequences. A rookie officer who thought a crowded cafe would make a target comply learned that cameras and documentation work both ways. A department that tried to quietly erase an arrest learned that the wrong person to quick release is someone who refuses to leave without a record. And people watching learned a practical lesson. Staying calm is important, but forcing a paper trail is what makes a system answer for itself. So here's the question for you. If you were Derek, would you have taken the quiet exit just to get home? Or would you have demanded the report and the incident number the way he did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever experienced something like this, whether at work, in a store, or in public, share what happened. It helps other people recognize the pattern faster. And if you want more real, grounded stories where accountability wins and people protect themselves the smart way, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Stop right there. Let me see some ID.
What's going on? Am I being detained?
Just give me your ID.
I can tell you my name. What crime are you investigating?
You've been walking past driveways. People don't know you. That's why.
Walking isn't a crime. Officer, I'm calling my dad.
What happens when a patrol officer decides a black teen looks out of place in a quiet neighborhood and treats calm like guilt? It doesn't end with a simple check-in. Not when the officer starts fishing for a crime that isn't there. And not when the phones on the porches start rolling. Because this time the cameras didn't just catch an ugly moment. They caught an unlawful stop being built in real time. Quick thing, where are you watching from today? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. And if you mess with stories where accountability actually shows up on paper, hit like and subscribe. Because this one turns on recordings, timestamps, and a person who knows exactly how the law is supposed to work. So here's where it picked up. Officer Brent Hollis had his patrol car angled just enough to control the sidewalk. Not fully blocking it, just making the point. He stood close, squared up, voice firm, asking for Malik Carter's ID like it was a routine thing. Malik stayed still, Hands visible, face neutral, 16 years old, black. Hoodie, backpack, phone in hand. Nothing flashy, nothing sketchy. Hollis didn't like Malik's calm. He wanted a different reaction. He wanted nervous talking, over-explaining, a stumble. Instead, Malik gave short answers and kept asking the one question that matters in stops like this. Was he being detained? And what crime was under investigation? Hollis pivoted fast. He told Malik he'd been seen walking past driveways and porches. He implied Malik was checking houses. He asked where Malik lived, then asked it again in a different way, like the first answer didn't count. He pressed for a full address. Then he pressed for a reason Malik was walking there at all, like walking was something you needed permission to do. Malik didn't take the bait. He didn't get loud. He didn't get cute. He didn't perform panic to make the officer comfortable. He held his ground with posture and silence, not attitude. And Hollis read that as defiance. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Some officers don't just want compliance. They want submission. Eye contact when they demand it. A nervous laugh. Yes, sir, on repeat. Malik wasn't giving any of that. He was giving lawful, controlled, minimal. And the officer started tightening the screws. Hollis stepped closer. He shifted from questions to commands. He told Malik to stand where he could see him better. He asked for the ID again and made it sound like Malik was refusing, even though Malik was asking for the legal reason first. Hollis glanced down the street like he was looking for support. Then he put a hand near his belt, not drawing anything, just signaling control. On a porch across the street, someone stood up. Phone out, no yelling, just recording. Another neighbor did the same thing 2 houses down. Different angle, different phone. A third person started recording from behind a screen door. Quiet neighborhood stuff, people minding their own business until they aren't. Hollis noticed. He got sharper. He started narrating Malik's behavior out loud, like he was building a case for an invisible jury. He framed Malik's calm as suspicious. He framed basic questions as non-compliance. He framed the lack of ID as a reason to hold him longer, even though he still hadn't stated a clear crime. And he kept circling back to the same vague claim. Malik looked like he didn't belong there. Here's who Malik actually was. Malik Carter lived a few blocks away. Same city, same zip code. He'd walked these streets before. He was heading to meet a friend and drop something off. Normal teen stuff with a backpack and a deadline. He wasn't out prowling. He wasn't peeking into windows. He wasn't touching gates. He was walking in a straight line, eyes forward, phone in hand. Like every other kid who's ever tried to get somewhere without making a production out of it. His parents had taught him the rules that exist outside the rulebook. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue on the sidewalk. Don't joke. Don't match energy. Get through the moment. Handle the rest later with paperwork and receipts. Malik was doing exactly that, and Hollis hated it. Because Hollis had already decided what he saw. A teenager, black. Moving through a neighborhood that Hollis mentally filed under not his. That's the whole engine behind these stops. It's not a report. It's not a witness. It's not a description tied to a specific crime. It's vibes dressed up as public safety. Hollis tried another angle. He asked Malik if he was on probation. He asked if he had anything illegal on him. He asked if he could search the backpack. He presented it like a simple request, like Malik would be unreasonable to say no. Malik said no without making it dramatic. No consent, no search, no volunteering. Hollis's face tightened. He stopped pretending it was casual. He told Malik he could sit on the curb while he figured it out. He suggested Malik was being held until Hollis felt satisfied. That's when you could feel the shift. Not just uncomfortable, not just annoying. This was moving toward detention. Across the street, the porch phones stayed steady. You could see people's heads tilt like they were clocking the same thing. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was control. Hollis looked around again. More eyes now, more cameras. And instead of backing off, he dug in harder, like he couldn't afford to lose in front of witnesses. That's when Malik did the smartest thing he could do without escalating anything. He reached for his phone and started calling his dad, and Hollis immediately tried to stop even that, because the moment Malik connected someone else to the situation, Hollis lost the ability to rewrite it in private. Malik's thumb hovered over his screen, and Hollis reacted like the phone itself was a threat. Hollis stepped in, told Malik to put the phone away, then immediately switched it up and demanded Malik tell him who he was calling. He wanted a control of the line before the call even connected. That's how these situations tip. The moment another adult gets involved, the officer can't freestyle anymore. Malik didn't argue, and he kept his hands visible and kept the phone low, not waving it around, not making sudden moves. He kept the call going anyway, calm, quiet. The kind of calm that should have lowered the temperature. It didn't. Hollis treated it like Malik was challenging him in public, because that's what it was now. Public. 3 phones across the street. One neighbor had a steady wide shot. Another had a closer angle from the driveway. Somebody else stood on a porch and narrated what they were seeing, including the time on their lock screen. That detail mattered later more than anyone knew in that moment. Hollis glanced at the phones and his posture changed. He widened his stance. He started talking louder, like volume could replace legal reason. He repeated that Malik didn't belong in the area. He kept circling the same claim. Malik had been walking past houses. He pointed at driveways like they were evidence. Here's the problem. Walking past houses is what sidewalks are for. So Hollis grabbed for something else. He claimed there had been recent break-ins. He implied Malik matched the type of person involved. He never gave a real suspect description. No clothing, no height, no direction of travel, no call from a resident. Just vague warnings in a tone that said, "Trust me." Malik stayed with the basics. He asked if he was being detained. He asked what specific crime Hollis was investigating. He didn't mouth off. He didn't plead. He didn't offer a whole life story to win sympathy. That's when Hollis went to pressure tactics. He told Malik to step back, then told him to step forward. Small commands. A compliance test disguised as officer safety. Hollis asked for Malik's full name and date of birth, then treated the hesitation, Malik thinking before answering, as another red flag. Hollis told Malik to sit on the curb again, more firm this time, like it wasn't a suggestion anymore. Malik moved slowly and did it, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he understood the street math. Don't turn a stop into a physical struggle. Let the cameras work. Let the records work. Hollis didn't relax. He radioed in. You could hear the cadence. He gave the location, said he had a suspicious subject, and added details that sounded more certain than what he actually had. He framed it like Malik was a possible burglary lookout. He didn't say he had a witness. He didn't say he had a report tied to Malik. He just tried to upgrade the encounter with his own language. And now you had a classic setup. An officer trying to justify the stop after the fact, while 3 neighbors recorded from 3 angles. One neighbor asked, from a distance, what Malik had done. Not yelling, just loud enough to be on audio. Hollis snapped back without answering the question. He told the neighbor to stay back. Then he tried to tell them to stop recording. Bad move. Recording was legal. Everybody there knew it. And when people know they're on solid ground, they don't fold. The neighbor didn't stop. They zoomed in. Hollis turned back to Malik and tried to force a confession out of thin air. He asked where Malik was going. He asked why he was in that specific block. He asked what was in the backpack. He pushed again for consent to search it. He made it sound like saying no would make things worse. Malik didn't give consent. Again. Same calm. At that point, Hollis started treating Malik's calm like he was trained, like Malik had something to hide. That's the mental trick some officers use. If you're nervous, you're guilty. If you're calm, you're guilty and clever. It's a rigged game. Hollis then moved into the detention zone. He told Malik he wasn't free to leave. He said he was being held until Hollis figured it out. He didn't articulate a clear legal basis. He just planted the flag. I decide when this ends. Malik's phone finally connected. Malik kept his voice low and controlled. He told his father where he was. He described the street. He said an officer had stopped him and wouldn't say what crime he was suspected of. He didn't call the officer names. He didn't dramatize it, just facts. That call did two things at once. It reassured Malik and it threatened Hollis, because now Hollis wasn't just dealing with a teenager. He was dealing with whoever was coming next. And Hollis could hear, from Malik's tone, that this wasn't going to be some frantic parent who arrived yelling and made it easy to dismiss. Hollis tried to interrupt. He stepped closer, told Malik to end the call. He claimed Malik needed to focus on the investigation. He warned that refusing to cooperate could lead to him being taken in. The porch cameras caught all of it. The order, the threat, the lack of explanation. And then another patrol unit rolled into view at the end of the street, slow and deliberate, like backup arriving to reinforce a story that still didn't have facts. Malik stayed seated. He didn't flinch. He kept his hands visible. He kept the call going until he could, because his father was already on the way, and he was close. Judge Adrian Carter arrived fast and quiet, parked clean, walked in with his hands open, no yelling, no dad voice, just control. Malik sat on the curb. Officer Hollis stood over him. A second unit lingered nearby. 3 neighbors recorded from porches and driveways. One of them kept saying the time out loud for the camera. Hollis tried to summarize the stop like it was solid. He claimed Malik looked out of place and seemed like he was checking houses. The judge didn't debate feelings. He forced facts. He asked what specific crime Hollis was investigating. Hollis had burglary concerns in the area. The judge asked what specific facts tied Malik to that crime. Hollis pointed to Malik walking past driveways carrying a backpack and not handing over ID immediately. The judge kept it tight. He asked if dispatch sent Hollis to a call about Malik. No. He asked if any resident reported a teen matching Malik's description right then. No. He asked if Hollis saw Malik try doors, enter yards, peer into windows, or handle property. Hollis couldn't say yes. That's where Hollis started shifting. He tried to pivot from what Malik did before the stop to how Malik acted during the stop. He framed calm answers and basic questions as uncooperative behavior. The judge cut that off. He asked if Malik was being detained. Hollis said yes, then tried to soften it by calling it temporary. The judge made him own the legal basis. He asked what reasonable suspicion existed at that moment, tied to a specific crime. Hollis started stacking phrases instead of facts. Officer safety, totality, preventive policing, neighborhood issues. He sounded like he was building a story while standing inside it. The neighbors' phones caught every version. Earlier it was out of place. Then walking past houses. Then break-ins. Now complaints. The timeline didn't match the confidence. Then Sergeant Elena Ruiz arrived. She didn't waste time. She asked Hollis for the reason for detention. Hollis tried again, but he trimmed his language. He avoided out of place now. He leaned on recent break-ins. Ruiz asked for the specific call, bulletin, or description. He didn't have one. Ruiz looked at the phones, looked at Malik, looked at the judge. She made the only smart new move left. She ended the stop and told Malik he was free to go. Malik stood up slow, hands visible. No celebration. He walked to his dad. Before they left, the judge delivered one line for the record. He said a hunch wasn't a statute. Judge Carter didn't treat it like a bad day. He treated it like a record. That night, he wrote everything down while it was fresh. Exact time Malik left the house. The street where Hollis stopped him. When the first neighbor started filming. When Hollis said Malik wasn't free to leave. When Ruiz arrived. When Malik got released. He didn't write feelings. He wrote a timeline. Next morning, he requested the footage and logs the way he'd request evidence in a case. Bodycam from Hollis in the second unit. Dashcam, dispatch audio, CAD notes. Any break-in bulletin Hollis claimed he was responding to. The officer's report. Any supervisor notes. Anything tied to that stop number. Then he filed a formal complaint with the department, not a rant. A clean, detailed document with timestamps and specific claims. Unlawful stop, detention without articulable reasonable suspicion, attempted search without consent, interference with Malik's phone call, and escalation once recording started. The city couldn't bury it because the porch videos were already out. Multiple angles, clear audio. And the neighbor who said the time out loud? That made it easier to line up with dispatch logs. When the body cam and call logs came in, the whole thing got simple. Hollis's report didn't match what the cameras showed. In the report, Hollis tried to make it look like Malik's actions before the stop were the reason for the stop. But the footage showed Hollis started with out-of-place energy and only later added break-ins language once Malik didn't fold. In the report, Hollis implied Malik refused lawful commands. The video showed Malik complied with positioning, stayed seated, kept hands visible, and only refused two things: consenting to a search and giving extra info beyond what the law required. In the report, Hollis framed the detention like it was brief and necessary. The neighbor videos and dispatch timestamps showed it dragged, and nothing new came in that justified holding Malik. Then the city had to answer a question they didn't want on paper. What crime exactly was being investigated when Malik got told he wasn't free to leave? They couldn't answer it without admitting the truth. So Judge Carter filed a civil rights lawsuit focused on the unlawful stop and detention, not a racism lawsuit built on vibes. A clean constitutional claim built on recordings, logs, and contradictions. Discovery made it worse for the city. Depositions forced Hollis to explain each shift in his story. He tried to justify it as evolving observations. The video showed it was evolving excuses. Call logs showed there was no dispatch-driven reason to stop Malik. No matching suspect description. No call for service about him. No bulletin tying Malik to anything specific at that time and place. The city's lawyers saw the same problem every time they turned a page. If they defended the stop, they defended a hunch. If they defended the detention, they defended holding a kid with no stated crime. That's not a case you win with a jury. That's not a case you want in the news. So the city settled. They paid. They tightened policy. The settlement required changes that were easy to explain but hard to ignore. Officers had to articulate the specific crime and the specific facts for pedestrian stops. Supervisors had to review longer stops faster. Training got updated around First Amendment recording and how not to escalate when the public is watching. Some departments call it officer safety. This time, they had to include public safety too. And Hollis? Hollis didn't get to shrug it off. Internal review compared his report, the body cam, the porch videos, and the dispatch records. The gaps weren't minor, they were the whole story. The city didn't just face liability for a bad stop. They faced liability for a report that tried to fix a bad stop after the fact. Hollis lost his job. Malik didn't get a victory speech. He got something better. Proof that he hadn't imagined it. Proof that calm wasn't guilt. Proof that suspicious without facts collapses when people record and someone follows through. And that's the point. If suspicious is the only reason, the stop doesn't hold up once the facts are captured. Cameras, logs, timestamps, paperwork. That's what turns a street story into accountability. Now tell me this. If you were Malik, would you have stayed as calm? If you were one of those neighbors, would you have pulled your phone out? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with somebody who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the truth doesn't just get said, it gets proven.